Hi. So today I am just going to present my three lesson plans that I will be using during NTPA. And I am teaching 8th grade ELA, and the unit that I am teaching is the opinion essay unit. My lessons are all going to be from 2 to 3:15, so they're an hour and 15 minutes long. And the first lesson's objective is students will be able to identify the central opinion of an opinion essay and evaluate how the author develops and expresses their opinion throughout the text. And below that, you can see the corresponding standard that directly relates to the objective. So, to start the first lesson of this unit, I am just going to start talking about how I really like having pets, and specifically dogs as pets. I've always had dogs for pets. I love them. And then I'm just going to explain they're kind, they're gentle, they always want to play, and they're good cuddlers. Then I'm going to prompt the students to answer the questions. Have you ever had a pet dog? Do you like having a pet dog? And why? And then, is there anyone that doesn't agree with me that dogs are the best pets? Can you explain why? So, this is just building some student rapport. It is also an example of some good discourse and just having students kind of know where their peers are at. And then I'm just going to end this little introduction activity by saying we all have to have we all seem to have different feelings and opinions about dogs, and we're all able to explain our opinions. In this new unit, we are going to be learning how to read and write our own opinion essays. And a quick adaptation for this is that I was just going to have my presentation on the whiteboard that show or on the smartboard that shows pictures of me with my dogs. This might help ELL students who have difficulty understanding maybe what I'm talking about, and if I can give them pictures of my pets, that might help. So then, for explaining behavioral expectations, the first two expectations that I have are ones that will be happening throughout the entire semester, so they will not be new. I'm just going to ask students to raise their hands when they're answering, and then remind students to listen to others when they're talking. And then the third rule pertains to what we would be doing today in the guided practice, and it is just to ask the students to keep their books closed until we are about to read the text, and I will remind them while we are doing guided practice. And these rules will actually be the first two rules will actually be in the front of the room because they will be rules that are used throughout the semester, so it's nothing new, and they can reference them whenever they need to. Then I will share the agenda and objectives with my students. This will also be on the presentation so that they know explicitly what we're doing for the day. The objective itself will be on the presentation, and then the objective will also be on the whiteboard so that students can continually refer to it throughout the lesson and know what the goals are for the day. So I will say, today I'll be teaching you how to identify an opinion in a text and how an opinion should be developed. Then we will read an excerpt out of our textbook together and practice identifying the main opinion and the development of the opinion. Finally, each of us will complete a worksheet during class time that will be handed in by the end of class. So for my steps of instruction, I will give the students a definition of an opinion essay because this is the introductory lesson to the opinion essay unit. So they need to know the foundations of an opinion essay. I will then read a short opinion essay that I wrote previously about dogs, which correlates with the introduction of the lesson, and this will be written on the smartboard. Then I will explicitly model for the students the how to find the certain parts of an opinion essay by doing a read aloud that pertains to the opinion essay that I've written on the whiteboard. So I will underline the opinion statement in blue. And before I underline the opinion statement, I will be thinking out loud. Okay, what is the author trying to get across in the text? And then that will be the opinion statement. I'll underline it in blue. Then I will do the same for the developments, which are examples and elaborations. I will underline them in red. And I will do the same for the concluding paragraph. I will actually circle the concluding paragraph green, and then I will once again underline the restated opinion statement blue. And just keep in mind that I will be doing a think aloud about how did I come or how did I find these aspects? What questions was I asking myself in order to find the opinion statement, the development, the concluding paragraph, and then the restated opinion statement. Then I will explain to all my students that every good opinion essay must clearly state their opinions and they must use examples and elaborations that develop the text, which corresponds directly to the objective for the day. And then I will also explain to the students how my example was a good example and how it met the criteria. The adaptations that I have for this section is that I will print out a copy of my opinion essay about the dogs that will already have the underlinings so that the students can refer back to it in future lessons. I will also have it in the front of the room on the whiteboard and it will be there throughout the lesson so students can refer to it. And then I will also make an anchor chart with the same opinion essay and the same underlining so that we can use it throughout the unit. For my guided practice, I'm going to have my students popcorn read the Maya Angelou text Passports to Understanding, and I will have a copy of this on the smartboard. Students will have a dry erase copy with them, so basically it will just be a copy of the text and it will be laminated. Then I will ask the students what the opinion statement is, and the students will identify the opinion statement and then they will describe to me why it was the opinion statement. I will have the other students give a thumbs up if they agree with their peer or a thumbs down if they agree and if or disagree. And if they disagree, I need them to explain why. Then, after I have had them do this, I will have them underline that opinion statement blue, and I will do it too on the whiteboard. So not only am I modeling for them in the instruction how to find the opinion statement, but in the guided practice, they're finding the opinion statement and we're going through it together. We're all underlining. I'm underlining on the smartboard. They're underlining on their dry erase example. So I will do this the same, or I will do the same thing for all of the steps. So I will have them do the same for identifying developments, underlining developments. I will have them do the same for circling the concluding paragraph and then underlining the restated opinion essay. And through each step, again, thumbs up, thumbs down, explain why if you give a thumbs down. Then, as kind of an informal assessment for understanding, I will just have the students rate the effectiveness of an opinion essay on a scale of 1 through 10, 1 being 1 being unbelievable and 10 being very believable. And then I'll call on the students who rated lowly, in the middle, and highly, and I'll just have them each explain why they rated the way that they did, just responding to the text. So the adaptations I have for this section, each student will have their book open as we read. Students will have the story printed out on the laminated sheets that I talked about earlier. Students that have difficulty reading can have a printed out version that is laminated that has maybe a larger text and easier font to read, just in case they need something to better follow along with. ELLs will also have a reference sheet that maybe has more images so that they can follow along and make those connections between the words and the images. And then students can use a reference sheet that I created earlier the in in the steps of instruction of my opinion essay to have to reference. For the independent practice, I'm just going to hand out the 3-level guide to the students. I'm going to ask them to work independently and to have their textbooks open. They're allowed to come up to me if they have any questions, and then I will have my dog opinion essay example on the whiteboard with the underlinings on it. And I will also have the textbook example on the smartboard with the underlinings on it, and then they'll also have their reference sheets to use. My adaptations are that the ELLs can use their Chromebooks to translate certain but not all words. Struggling readers will have an audio recording. Gifted students will be able to answer the bonus questions, and students with gaps in academic knowledge will be provided with a reference sheet that scaffolds them on how to find each type of question that is in the assessment, so factual, inferential, and application. They will also be given page numbers that their answers will be found on. This will not be for every student. This will just be for the students that I know have difficulty in this area, and I know that I can help them if I just give them these references. For my closure, I'm just going to have my students hand in their assessments. Those who are not done will finish it for the next day. And then I will just say, now that we've had time working with the text and have gone through examples in class together, can anyone tell me what the importance is of effectively being able to develop their opinion? So really, I just want them to be able to make the connection of how this is effective in the opinion unit, how it is how it is effective in real life. And then to kind of finish the day, I'll just have students write down any questions that they have regarding the lesson or opinion essays on the sticky side of a sticky note. And then when they walk out the door, they'll just stick it on the wall. And the reason it's on the sticky side of the sticky note is that other students won't be able to read their questions because their questions are facing the wall. Then at the end of the day, I can take those down, I can assess where each student is struggling, see what questions I need to answer, and see what I can make more clear for my students the next day. So now going into my second and third lesson, these are the color-coded ones. So I'm just going to get the rubric out here so I make sure I know what colors I'm talking about. Okay, so again, my classes are running between 2 and 3:15. And this is the second lesson of the opinion essay lesson segment. These lessons are just the first 3 lessons in the unit. Obviously, there would be more lessons that follow that have students create their own opinion essay. So my objective for the second lesson is that students will be able to identify an author's opinion in an opinion essay and determine how the author responds to opposing viewpoints. And there is a correlating standard. So to start my day, I'm just going to highlight it because it's a little difficult for me to read. I will say, yesterday we talked about how to identify the central opinion in an opinion essay. Today we're going to learn how to respond to counterclaims that go against our opinions. So the reason that this is a dark yellow color is because I am explicitly connecting the previous day's work to today's, so that students know what I learned yesterday is going to have to do with what I'm going to learn today. Again, for explaining behavioral expectations, these first 2 rules are ones that we are working with throughout the entire semester, so they will be in the front of the classroom and they will be known by the students. Remind students to raise their hands to ask questions, listen to each other when they are talking. And then the third rule has to do with the guided instruction, which is when using dry erase boards, take turns and do not fight over them. I will remind this to them before we do the activity, not right away in the beginning of the lesson. And the reason that this is blue is because it is building student rapport amongst students because they have to respect each other when they are talking, and student rapport amongst the students and myself because they have to raise hands when they have questions instead of interrupting me when I'm teaching. Then for the adaptations, it is just how these rules will be in the front of the classroom as previously stated, and that they will be explicitly stated before the group work begins. So my agenda and objectives are red because they are clearly addressing the goals or the objectives for the day. So my agenda would be today I'm going to teach you some new vocabulary and how to respond to counterclaims. Then we are going to practice responding to counterclaims in groups. Finally, we will have time to finish our QAR assessment in class. So this will be on a presentation, which is what I'm talking about in my adaptations. The objective will also be in the presentation, but the objective will also be on the smartboard so that students can continually refer to it throughout the lesson so they know where the lesson is going and what their goals are throughout the lesson. So again, students will be able to identify an author's opinion in an opinion essay and determine how the author responds to the opposing viewpoints. So for my steps of instruction, I am going to front load vocabulary terms on the whiteboard. And the reason that they are red is because they are the vocabulary terms, not because I'm trying to connect them to anything in regards to the color coding system we have going on here. So before I give the students the actual definition, I'm going to have the students try to give their own definition of the words. And I'm also going to have them try to use the words in sentences in which they are using the vocabulary words in context. The reason for this is because I want my students to be able to construct their own meaning around words, and I want them to really use higher order thinking to kind of attempt to guess what the words mean instead of me directly telling them right away. And then I will explain how in an opinion essay, um, like the ones we read yesterday, the author needs to respond to counterclaims against their opinion to be credible. Then I'm going to use my previous lesson example, which had my opinion of how dogs are the best pets, and I will create a counterclaim against that opinion, which is dogs are messy and are not good pets. So the reason that this is yellow is because, again, I'm previously linking what we learned yesterday to today's lesson. I am saying, okay, we now know how to identify an opinion essay and how to identify an opinion. Now we're going to learn how to identify a counterclaim and respond to them. Also, because I'm using the same opinion essay example about the dogs that I created yesterday, that is helping students add to their schema of opinion essays because they're not trying to think of a new essay and trying to identify the new opinion. They have an essay that they already know what the opinion statement is, and they are able to work off of that. Next, I'm going to introduce students to the RACE anchor chart. And RACE stands for restate the claim, answer the claim by turning it into a question, cite your source for the answer, and explain your response using evidence and your own reasonings. So the reason this is red is because I have it as subject-specific pedagogy, and the reason it is subject-specific is because it's a RACE anchor chart that is specific to learning how to respond to counterclaims in terms of an opinion essay. Because when you respond to a counterclaim in terms of an opinion essay, that is going to be some of your advantages, which will be your elaborations or your examples. Then I'm going to explicitly model how to use the RACE chart using my counterclaim that I created in connection to my opinion essay example about dogs. So that counterclaim would be, as previously stated, dogs are messy and are not good pets. So I'm going to think aloud through the anchor chart, and I'm just going to think, okay, restate the claim. So I need to identify the claim. The claim is dogs are messy and are not good pets. Then I'm going to answer the claim by turning it into a question. Here is why dogs are not, or not, here is why. Why do you think dogs are messy and are not good pets? And then you say, I think dogs are not messy if you know how to clean up after them, if you train them how to go outside, and that would be fulfilling my C and my E because I'm using my own evidence and my own reasonings. And the way that the vocabulary is linked to the race anchor chart is that you can see restate the claim, which is a vocabulary word, explain your response, which is a vocabulary word, using evidence, vocabulary word, and reasonings. So the reason we had to front load the vocabulary is because it directly correlated with the race chart, and they would not be able to use the race chart unless they knew what the vocabulary was and how to use the vocabulary in context. And then I will explain to students that responses must be relevant and they cannot simply be because your opinion is wrong. Or it cannot be like your reasoning cannot be, I do not think dogs are a messy pet because they like to sit on my bed. That does not have anything to do with why you think dogs are not messy pets. And I need to really get the statement across that your evidence has to be relevant in order for it to be credible. So then the adaptations I have for this section is just hand out reference sheets to the students, and each reference sheet will have a definition of vocab, will have the definitions of the vocab words on one side, and then a filled out counterclaim race example on the other, and it will be filled out according to my opinion essay about dogs. Finally, ELL students will have a reference sheet that includes images to help them connect the terms to the words in regards to the definition terms. Again, in guided practice, I have the next two bullet points red because they are subject specific because they are using the race chart. So I will hand out to students a laminated race chart, and it will be empty, like blank. And students will use dry erase markers on the blank race laminated chart to answer the counterclaim against having dogs in their own words. So the reason I'm having students do this is because I want to show them that there can be multiple reasonings and evidence that pertain specifically to personal experiences, not one answer fits all. Then I will give the students one more counterclaim that they have to respond to using the dry erase chart. Again, this counterclaim will be in regards to my opinion essay about dogs. So it might be dogs are difficult to train as the counterclaim, and students have to respond to that. Then I have some higher order thinking questions. I will ask some students to identify the purpose of responding to counterclaims using the key vocabulary words in their response. So I don't want them to just give me the textbook definition of responding to a counterclaim. I want them to construct their own meaning of um, what a counterclaim is, what the purpose of responding is, and I want them to interpret why they have to respond to counterclaims and why it has to be credible. Then I want some more students to build off of the previous student by asking a different student to give a specific example in real life where there is a need to respond to a counterclaim. So for them, that might be Well, you need to respond to someone who tweeted at you and you were um, tweeting back to explain why you believe something you believe. Then I'm going to take away the dry erase charts because now we're going to move into a group activity. And at this time, I'm going to explain to the students that they need to share the whiteboard and take turns, as I said in the behavior expectations part. So in this group activity, I'm going to have students into predetermined groups of 5, and this is part of the adaptations, but these groups of 5 are created by the students' community assets. So if I know a student has difficulty staying on track, I might put someone else in that group who is good at organizing things. Or if I know that I have a student that has problems writing syntactically, I might have a student who excels linguistically to not write for the student, but to help guide the student in how to write syntactically. Then I will give each group, there will be 6 groups because I have 30 students. I will give each group a small whiteboard and a marker. And the way that it will work is that I will put a counterclaim on the board, and then students are going to respond to that counterclaim. And the counterclaims that I'm going to use are going to have to do with what I know are my students' personal assets. So I know that many of my students are um, intrigued in sports, they take part in sports, and that's what they love. So a lot of these counterclaims are going to be against sports because I know that the students will react negatively to this and have personal experiences to back up their evidence and reasonings. So for an example, one of the counterclaims might be sports are a waste of time. And the reason I have it as yellow is because, again, it is it is a personal asset to the students that do sports, and it is a community asset because they're working in that group activity um, that work together to come up with one coherent answer. So again, I'm going to explain to the students that they have to answer with proper grammar and punctuation in their response, and they must use the race chart to create their responses to the counterclaim. And the reason it is red is because they're using the race chart, which is subject specific. Then, oh, and the reason this is like that yellow color is because grammar and punctuation has been worked on throughout the entire semester. So again, I'm linking prior academic knowledge. Students will then have to take turns in the group writing the counterclaims on the whiteboard, and their roles will rotate with each counterclaim. The reason that this is blue is because this correlates directly to the objective, which states that the authors know how to respond to counterclaims. The students are the authors, and they are responding to counterclaims. So each student will be given a letter of race, RACE, and the students of that letter must fulfill the letter of the anchor chart. Then the 5th person must be the scribe that writes down their response on the whiteboard and presents it to the class. Again, the reason this is yellow is because they are using their community assets to work individually, but to come up with one coherent answer. When giving group answers, each student of the group have to explain why their answers fulfilled the race chart criteria, and the 5th person has to explain how it tied all of their answers together to create one response. And the reason this is green is because it's higher order. They're not just identifying what race, like what each part of it means, they're explaining why they answered the way that they did, how they fulfilled the criteria, so on and so forth. After we have done this about 3 or 4 times, depending on time, I'm going to have my students do the in-class reading. So staying in the groups, I'm going to have students open their textbooks to the student working draft, which is an excerpt in our book, and it is part of the opinion essay unit. And the reason that it is blue is because it's going to teach students how to respond to claims directly in the reading. So the students are going to popcorn read through the reading of the working draft, and then I'm going to model for the students how to find responses to counterclaims in the text by finding a counterclaim and then ticking off the race chart criteria to make sure that it correlates with a counterclaim response. And the reason that I have this blue is because I'm modeling it for the students, which is building rapport between me and the students. And it could also be red because it is subject specific in the fact that this is a opinion essay unit working draft and that we are using the race chart. Then I'm going to ask students to identify other responses to counterclaims within the reading. So they need to go throughout the reading and try to find other counterclaims. And they, just like how I had done previously, are going to check off the criteria of a race chart. Then I have some higher order thinking questions to end the guided practice. And I'm just going to ask students if the author used the race chart effectively, why or why not? Ask students if they think this response is effective, and then I need them to explain why or why not. And then does anyone agree with the response but have different reasonings, why or why not? So these are all ways that students are interpreting the text by deciding if it's effective and how they're responding to the text by does anyone agree with this response but have different reasonings. So they have to come up with a response maybe that has the same yes I agree but different reasonings, therefore showing that they're not just interpreting the text or they're not just constructing meaning from the text, they're also responding from the text. My adaptations for this section is that I will hand out to each student a blank race anchor chart that is worksheet size and that is laminated, and that way they can follow along, they can write in their answers. I will create groups based off of my knowledge of students' ability, which I already talked about. And the working draft will be in the front of the classroom on the smartboard as well in the textbooks. ELL students might have a printed copy with more visualizations. And then students with reading disabilities will also have a printed out copy that caters to their needs, such as larger text, maybe an easier font to read, etc. So finally, for independent practice, I'm going to hand out the QAR assessment. And the reason that this is green is because these questions are factual, inferential, and application questions. They are higher order thinking. I'm going to have them work independently. I can play music at this time if I want. I'll ask the students if they want that. And then I'll make sure that the race chart vocabulary is explicitly in their QAR answers. So the QAR is open answer. And because it is blue, it means that the assessment is connected to the objective. So students will be reading the working draft that we already read, and they're going to decide, did the author respond to the claims, the counterclaims directly? And that is exactly what the objective is. And then students are allowed to come up to ask questions, which is again just establishing a good relationship between me and the students. They don't have to feel worried about, oh, I need to ask a question, but I don't want the teacher to think I'm dumb or anything. I just want it to be really clear that they can come up to me, they can ask me questions, and I'll help them with it. So again, my adaptations for this section is ELLs can use their Chromebooks to translate certain but not all words. Students will also have audio recording if they need it. Gifted students will be able to fill out the worksheet more in depth because it is all short answer. And students with academic knowledge gaps will be provided again with that reference sheet that gives them scaffolds for finding each type of question, factual, inferential, and application. And they will be given the page numbers. Again, it might be the same students that needed them before. There might be those students that need them before that don't need them today because they learned yesterday. Either way, it'll be there in case they need it. For my closure, I am just going to have the students hand in their homework. If they haven't finished it, it's due the next day, just like yesterday. And then I'm going to say, is anyone able to explain to me why authors of the opinion essays need to answer counterclaims? How is this applicable to our real lives? So the reason that this is this green color is because it is higher order thinking. They're not just identifying, they're explaining why. They're having to come up with their own reasons, and they're actually making applications to their real lives. Then I'm going to have students write down on sticky notes the objective for the day, and if they think they were able to achieve it with a quick explanation of why or why not. And I just want them to leave it on their desk. And the reason this is red is because it is specifically addressing the objective for the day. I want to see if students feel like they were able to do what we learned by themselves, and if not, I want them to explain why so that I can help them. Again, my adaptation for this section is just have the students write it on the sticky side of the sticky note and put it on their desk so that no one else can see what they said, only I can see what they said, and that I can just build off of what they need from me so that the next lesson will be even better. So finally, for my third lesson and final lesson of this lesson unit or segment, um, I will again be teaching from 2 to 3:15, and the objective for the day is students will be able to examine the opinion and claims in an opinion essay and evaluate if the reasoning is relevant to the opinion of the author. And then there is a correlating standard for the day. So as you can see, there's a lot of yellow here because I am I'm linking previous learned information to today's lesson. So I specifically say, yesterday we learned about how to make a claim against a counterclaim and how to keep that claim relevant. Then I will ask the students, what do I mean when I say relevant? Can anyone remind me how we keep our claims relevant? So yesterday we talked about how they have to be relevant to be credible. Now I'm asking the students a higher order thinking question. I want them to refer back to what we learned yesterday, and I want them to make the connection between what what relevance means and how this is going to connect to today's lesson. Then I'm going to say, our developments must also be relevant in order to further our opinion. Can anyone give me an example or definition of what a development is? We learned about it 2 days ago. So I am explicitly linking for them that we will be talking about developments again, which we learned in lesson 1. And I want them to give me an example of a development in their own words. Again, this is higher order thinking because they are constructing meaning and they are just trying to remember what we learned the first day so that they know, okay, the last 2 lessons that I've learned all have to do with today. So I need to remember what I learned the day before. I need to remember what I learned 2 days before so that I can do today's lesson. Finally, I'm going to say today we're going to practice identifying relevant and irrelevant developments in opinion essays. And I'm going to show the students anchor chart of my opinion essay that was created on the first day. The reason this anchor chart is the one in my opinion essay with the underlinings on it. And this might help them remember what a development is because we underline the developments in red. So just showing them this anchor chart might spark that memory, might help them remember what the definition of a development is. Again, as I have said for the previous 2 lessons, the first 2 expectations that I have for my students are rules that will be followed throughout the semester, so they will be in the front of the classroom. And the third one will have to do with our guided instruction, and I will explain it to the students when we start the guided instruction, but it is remind students to not be loud during the gallery walk so that everyone has a chance to read the opinion essays. And again, it is blue because it is building rapport amongst the students and myself, and also just basically telling the students, respect your peers, respect me while I'm teaching. And for adaptations, it's just basically that the first 2 are in the front of the classroom and that this will also be on a also be on the presentation, so they'll be able to see it visually. Again, the agenda and the objectives will also be on the next slide of the presentation. The objective, however, will be on the whiteboard so that they can refer to it throughout the lesson. And so my agenda is, today I will teach you how to determine if a development is relevant or irrelevant. Then we will practice evaluating developments through a gallery walk. And then finally, you will have time to complete the assessment in class. And my objective is students will be able to examine the opinion and claims in an opinion essay and evaluate if the reasoning is relevant to the opinion of the author. Again, you can see reasoning and claims are words or vocabulary words that we learned the day before. So these could have been that yellow color because, again, this objective links to the previous day's learning because the vocabulary is right in the objectives. So for my steps of instruction, I have a lot of yellow going on here. I'm going to reference the anchor chart of my opinion essay used in lesson 1. Again, this is my opinion essay with the underlinings on it. I'm going to ask students to take out the reference sheets that I created for them that first day, and then I'm going to ask them, can anyone remember why we underlined some paragraphs in red? Could someone else give me a quick definition of a development? So the reason I ask students why we underline some paragraphs in red is because I want them to be explicitly developing the link themselves. I want them to be linking the prior lesson to today, not just me telling them, okay, we're going to link them. So after the students identify it as a development and give me the definition of a development again, I'm going to explain that they're right. Those are elaborations and evidence. And then I'm going to explain that developments have to be relevant, which we kind of talked about yesterday in terms of in a response to a claim. Developments have to be relevant to the topic, just as they are in my anchor chart opinion essay example. Then I'll ask the students, can anyone remember why developments are important to have in an opinion essay? The reason it is yellow is because, again, we're going back to lesson 1, trying to remember the purpose of a development. The reason that these two are red is because developments, elaborations, and evidence all have to do with the opinion essay unit. They are not all of them are vocabulary words, but evidence is a vocabulary word, and a development is part of an opinion essay. So it is subject specific because this is ELA class. Then I'm going to have students pull out their textbooks to the Maya Angelou excerpt, Passports to Understanding. Again, red because this is an opinion essay by Maya Angelou. Could also be yellow again because this was in the first lesson. So again, we're using another example and linking it to today's lesson. This example is in the first lesson. And students have already read it, so they know what it's about. So I'm going to have the students identify the opinion, and the reason that this is that bright yellow color is because the whole story the whole opinion essay was about how students need to travel the world and experience different cultures because different cultures have more to offer than just us staying in America. Kind of like educating yourself through other cultures. Again, the reason this is bright yellow is because it's a cultural asset to the class. So then I'm going to think aloud about how to identify the developments. I'm going to underline in red the developments, and then I'm going to think aloud about how to decide if they are relevant. So the reason that they are this like dark blue color is because I'm specifically modeling the strategy for the students. I'm thinking aloud, I'm asking myself questions about what is a development? Is there anything here that adds to the opinion? Are there any specific examples here? How is she elaborating to develop her opinion? Then like we did in lesson 1, we're going to underline in red the developments, and we're going to think aloud about how to decide if they are relevant. So my think aloud of how to decide if they are relevant is, does it have to do with the opinion essay? If the opinion is specifically all students should travel the world to learn more, is it relevant for me to say, oh, well, they have really good food in France. Okay, they have good food, but how is that relevant to students who are learning more? So on and so forth. So I'm going to teach them this again with the Maya Angelou excerpt. And then I'm going to use the working draft to show students examples of irrelevant developments. Again, this working draft was used the second day of our lesson, and today's the third day. So it could have been yellow because, again, I am linking previous days' readings. And in the working draft, irrelevant developments were actually crossed out by the editor. So this will be a very specific visual model for the students to see, like, okay, this was irrelevant. They crossed it out because it has nothing to do with the opinion. Again, I'm modeling for the students. I'm thinking aloud how to show and to determine if something is irrelevant. And then I'm going to insert irrelevant information into my opinion essay of a dog and highlight it in orange to show that it is irrelevant. So if my essay about the dog was, oh, I love dogs because they're the best pets, I'm not going to say cats are really cool too. No, I'm just going to highlight that orange because that's irrelevant. That doesn't really have anything to do with my opinion. I really just want to model for the students, okay, what is relevant, what is irrelevant, and then I want to show them that when something is irrelevant, it gets crossed out. We don't want it in your development. We don't want it in your opinion essay. So my adaptations for this section was extra copies of the reference sheets that were handed out during lesson 1 will be available if they don't have them. Extra copies of the Maya Angelou excerpt will also be available for ELL students or for students that are struggling readers if they need to read it, maybe the ones with the larger text or the ones with the visualizations. And then I will hand out to students a bookmark with the questions that they should be asking themselves to decide if a development is relevant or not. So they will be able to refer to this bookmark to go back to the bookmark and say, okay, kind of cross off the criteria for if something is relevant. Does it pertain to the opinion? Yes or no? So on and so forth. Then for my guided practice, what I have students doing is actually a gallery walk. So what is happening is I will put up a bunch of opinion essays throughout the room in different parts of the room. The students will be with a partner. And the reason that this is blue is because they are building rapport with each other. Students individually have to fill out a sheet that has each number of the opinion essay, because the opinion essays will be labeled. And they will all be listed. Then students have to identify the opinion essays developments. So that's one part of the worksheet. Then they have to practice categorizing the specific essays as the specific essays developments as irrelevant or relevant. The reason that I have this as yellow is because as we had previously talked about, there will be the entire opinion essay. And in the first lesson, we learned about how to identify a development in an opinion essay. They're doing that again. They're going to read a whole essay, even though it will be short, and they will be identifying the development and then deciding if the development is relevant, which is what we're talking or learning about today. I'm going to play music at this time if they want. And then afterwards, I'm going to have all the students sit with their partners and discuss why they chose the answers that they did and if they are similar or different to one another. And this is like that bright blue that's supposed to be assessment is connected to the objective, um, which it is because students are deciding whether or not the development is relevant or irrelevant, which is exactly what the objective is. It could also be a dark blue because, again, students are with their partners. And the reason that this is green is because students are asking higher order thinking questions. Why did you choose this as a development? Did it meet the criteria? Why did you say that it fit under this category? Did we have the same answers, yes or no? And then explain why you might have different answers. So students are going to go through each of their opinion essays, and then I'm going to go through each of the opinion essays in class, and I'm going to ask students to raise up thumbs for relevant and thumbs down for irrelevant. So again, this is building rapport for the students because I might call on a student and ask them to give me the answer, and they will say relevant, and then I'll have the other students say, yeah, it was relevant, or no, it wasn't relevant. And if it wasn't relevant, okay, explain why you don't think it was relevant. And this is also an informal assessment for me just to see, okay, how many of my students get this? How many of my students are able to understand that, like, yeah, it is relevant, or no, it isn't relevant. Okay. Then I'm going to ask students from each side to explain why they chose the way that they did. So, again, as I previously said, is it relevant? We're going to ask students to say, yes, it is relevant because blah, 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 or no, it isn't relevant because it has nothing to do with the text. And again, this is green because this is higher order thinking. And it's just saying, like, why did you choose the way that you did? Are there different reasons for choosing the way that you did? Do your reasons work together um, that your side is correct? Like, when I say do your reasons work together that your side is correct, if you have different reasonings to someone else, well, does it still put it in the same category, but you just use different reasonings? Or did your different reasonings cause it to be in a different category? Then, as a group, I'm going to ask 4 students to read the author's final copy, and these will be volunteer students. And then I'm going to have each student take out their textbooks at this time and have the text up on the smartboard, and I'm going to specifically model before they do it. I'm going to specifically model how to identify a development. Even though the students have been doing this throughout the guided practice, I'm going to model it for them one more time before the independent practice. And then I'm just going to prompt students to find the developments in the author's final copy and to come to the whiteboard and underline them. So, are there any paragraphs that elaborate the opinion? Are there any paragraphs that include specific examples, evidence? How does this evidence demonstrate a development? So in order for the students to come up and underline on the smartboard, I want them to be responding to these questions just so I can make sure that they are actively engaging in the lesson. Then these questions are green because higher order thinking again. I'm going to ask the class if they think that so after one student goes up and underlines a development and explains why, I'm going to ask the class if they think the development is relevant or irrelevant. And then I'm going to choose students from each side to explain their reasoning. Then I'm going to ask other students if they have the same stance but with different reasoning. And I'm going to ask students to explain if they think the development of the text was effective in promoting the opinion of the author. So for these first couple questions, they're kind of building off of each student's answers, which is building rapport amongst the students. It's also discourse amongst the students. They're also responding to the text in the last question, which is explain if they think the development of the text was effective in promoting the opinion of the author. Not only are they constructing meaning, not only are they interpreting, but they're also responding to the text. They're saying, yes, this was relevant, and here are the reasons why, or no, this was irrelevant, and here are the reasons why, and this is how they could have done better. So I'm just going to keep on the whiteboard, I'm just going to keep up the reading, or on the smartboard, I'm just going to keep up the author's final copy that we had underlined so they can refer back to it in the independent practice. But before we go to independent practice, I'm just going to go quickly through the adaptations. So the irrelevant examples that we worked on in steps of instruction will be on the smartboard during the gallery walk so students can refer to them. And then on the bottom of the sheet that they are filling out during the gallery walk, there will be questions that the students should ask themselves while determining if a development is relevant. So one of the questions might be like, does this pertain to the opinion? Yes or no? And then it will have little clues to just help them decide if something is a development and to identify a development. And then I'm going to ask students to all give a thumbs up or down. Um, and when I do that, that's a quick informal assessment to see where the students are and if I need to maybe scaffold them a little more. And then the final copy will be in the front of the classroom as well as in the textbooks. ELL students might have a printed copy with more visualizations, as well for students with reading disabilities who may need a text that is easier to read, font size, text size, font color, etc. So finally, for my independent practice, I'm just going to hand out the carry. The students work independently, and they're going to have their textbooks open. The reason that the carry uses color is because the carry directly correlates to the objective, which is deciding if the author used developments effectively. Um, then I'm going to allow students to come up to my desk if they have any questions. The reason that it is blue is because I just want to build that rapport and in relationship with the students so that they know, as I previously stated, they don't have to be worried about coming up to me for questions. They can come talk to me if they need it. And then finally, have my example and the textbook example in the front of the classroom so students have a reference, which is part of an adaptation. And my adaptations for the independent practice is ELLs can use their Chromebooks to translate certain but not all words. I will have audio recording for students that need it. And then again, I will have that reference sheet to help students answer the factual, inferential, and application questions. Finally, for my closure, I'm just going to ask the students, and this should be that darker color green because it's higher order thinking. Can someone please explain to me what it means to have a relevant development? Can someone else tell me the importance of making sure the developments are relevant? So again, I just want to cement in the students' minds the developments have to be relevant and that there is importance to this, and I want them to make real world connections with them so that they understand that these last 3 lessons have not just been English class, they've been how to communicate with people in the real world. So if they're finished, I'm just going to have them hand in their worksheet by leaving it on their desk. If they're not, they have to return it the next day. And then I'm going to say, if you have any questions or concerns, leave a sticky note like we did the day before so I can look over them. And again, that's just building that relationship with the students. So that's the end of my 3 lesson unit that I will be using for EdTPA. It all has to do with opinion essays and they all try to scaffold off of each other. So the first one, then the second one works off the first one, and the third one works off the second and the first one. So if you have any questions, let me know. And thank you for watching.